Episode 9 here of the Lucas Grandsire podcast. We know what it is, the most creative name in the MMA industry when it comes to podcasts. Throwing it back on this one, someone I haven't worked with in like 3-4 years now, my former editor, Matthew Wells. Thank you for joining me, sir. How are you?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me on, buddy. It has been a while, man. It's been a while, but we've had some good times in these over the years doing our MMA thing.
For sure. It's weird to me because I feel like it was so long ago. And then, you start saying numbers, 3-4 years, and then it's like, holy shit. Like, yeah, I haven't worked with these people in forever.
Yeah. Time flies, man, especially covering this sport because it's like we literally live our lives, week to week, right? And especially now, like in 2020, when you have, big events like UFC events every single week, it's like you look up at the calendar, you're like, it's December already. It's like what? So yeah, time flies by covering MMA.
I know with fighters, like, they'll say like, I want to sit out for a year. Kevin Lee was talking about sitting out a few years and stuff. And in my mind, I'm like, God, that's going to be forever. And then you realize like it goes by pretty quick. Actually, it's not as dramatic as it seems at the time.
Yeah. No, there's times I've kind of stepped away from doing, a lot of stuff. Like now with the Body Lock, I just do, videos on YouTube and stuff, breaking down like hot topics, which is perfect for me. But there were times I was doing so much work.
Yeah.
Articles and YouTube and covering events and everything. And it gets overwhelming. And one of the things that most people don't realize is that it's done for very little pay, to say the least. So it's truly a labor of love, as they say.
That's exactly what it is. All the new people that start, it's always, I want to go cover events. I want to get paid. And I was like that too. I was thinking I was going to be working for MMA Junkie within 3 months. And then 3 years later, like, oh yeah, it's a grind. Like you really got to love it or you're going to fizzle out real quick.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the struggle that I think most people, realize. It's like, wait a second, I have to do all of this just to even kind of get recognition for my work. And it's just, it's like there's the life of a journalist and there's a life of an MMA journalist. And it's like the MMA journalism thing, like, unless you're like one of 5 people, like it's hard to make a living just doing that.
Or even the recognition thing. Like sometimes you'll be talking to like MMA journalists like on Twitter, and then there's one guy we were kind of debating something a little bit, and I said, people like us, we have to be unbiased. And he was like, we? Who is we? And it's like, fuck, like I cover the sport too, man. Give me some kind of recognition. Like I'm not, you want to be seen as like legit, even though maybe some of the higher people, it's like who's this glorified fan that thinks he does what I do?
Yeah, pretty much. Oh, I hate that label too. That hashtag MMA fans throw around. Glorified fan. Like, I get it sometimes because listen, you have to be a fan of the sport to do this, especially for the reasons that we just talked about, man. Like you're not going to get a lot of recognition. You're not going to get paid for it very well. So you really have to be a fan of the sport first. And especially when you start doing things like, like you do, like when you interview fighters all the time, like you really have to be interested in their story and their connection to the sport.
Yeah. And I know, the big thing, people may not realize, I do a lot of, you get invited to do podcasts, right? And you always get how'd you get into MMA? How'd you get into covering it? And I always try to shout out, it's like, MMA Latest is one of the places I started. And I give you a lot of credit because you were the guy I was harassing on Twitter to, like you got, it's like, let me come on the thing. It's like, man, we're a little bit full. And then, when I stepped into your shoes a little bit at MMA Latest, I realized you have a lot of crazy people that want to join your website and that think they're going to run shit. Like, they're like, yeah, go ahead and send me out to that Conor McGregor pay-per-view. It's like, man, who are you? Like, you can't just let anybody join because it turns out there's a lot of crazy people in this industry.
Yeah, we had a lot of stories like that back in the MMA days when myself and, Jim Edwards, we were pretty much running the show back then. We had so many things. Like I remember one example. We brought on this one guy, and I forget his name now, and I wouldn't say it here anyways, just for but we brought him on, and he was like, "Yeah, I live in California, blah blah blah," and we're like, "All right, cool, well, whenever you want to, drop an article in, or have an idea, drop it here in our little chat, and we'll talk about it or whatever." Come to find out, like a week later, this dude covered an event under MMA Latest without telling anybody and then caused issues at this event. And we had to talk to their PR. We're like, look, we brought this guy on a week ago. He never told us anything about covering an event. And yeah, please don't attach us to that, like whatsoever. That was a whole ordeal. And we had that happen at least once or twice. It was crazy.
Yeah, you don't realize how many people like, or and I was part of the people that was like too ambitious. You know what I mean? It was like, I'll start off at MMA latest, then I'll get picked up by an MMA junkie, which will lead to ESPN. ESPN, they'll want me to cover basketball or something because clearly I'm better than everybody else. And then you realize real quick, like, oh yeah, you're just a regular guy, and you're gonna have to grind it out, and you're gonna have to figure out, are you better than the people, and are you gonna rise to the top or not?
Yeah, that's the Ariel Helwani dream route you just mentioned right there.
Right.
Like, it's not gonna happen. Not gonna happen for most people, and that's when people really got to temper their expectations, man.
Yeah.
Like, if you're just starting out, I would say like pick a lane and kind of own that for a little while, and then see, once you start networking more and figuring out what opportunities are out there, then slowly work out there. Like, you're not going to end up on ESPN within a year. Like, I'm sorry,
No.
it's not going to happen.
No.
It's going to take a long time. I mean,
Yeah.
even for Ariel Helwani, who's the
Yeah.
the best example of success, I would say, as an MMA journalist right now. Like, it took him years to get where he's at, years and years and grinding. And I mean, you're talking about a guy who got his credentials pulled from the UFC at one point. Like, he's been through the ringer, man. So I mean, he deserves all the success in the world. And I told him the first time I met him, I was like, "You're the reason I'm even covering this event right now." To be completely honest. So, I mean, shout out to him. But listen, even being in that same room with him that one time, in that event in Vegas, I forget what event it was. I want to say it was like, I want to say it was 194 ish, something around there. I don't know. No, I don't know for sure. But yeah, meeting him, like, it was dope. But I mean, listen, me and him are still years apart,
Yeah.
so it's wild.
When you were working as editor at MMA Latest, like obviously you have a lot of people that want to come on, and you have to do your best to sort of who's going to be an asset or not. Did you have guys like you knew they were going to fizzle out right away, or they might have a future? Like, were you thinking about that when you were bringing people on board?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. That was kind of like our filtering process, so to speak. Like, we could identify which kind of people wanted to come on and immediately start doing those things like you were talking about, like, oh, I want to go cover this event like next
Yeah.
week, blah blah blah. Like, no, that's not gonna happen. Like, we want to see people that come in the door like ready to work, like
Yeah.
ready to be like, all right, I can handle this type of article, or like, I want to do this sort of thing. Like, they came in with ideas of content they wanted to create. And we're like, all right, cool, we'll let you go down that path, and see where it leads us. And then, like, if guys wanted to come in doing podcasts, all right, cool, we'll try you out. Like, we had at the time, we were doing a show with Jordan Killian. He was like the regular host. Derek Bowe was on there a lot. And, we would have like larger roundtable, and we'd bring in people just to see, like, how did they sound on the podcast? Like, did you put us to sleep? Like, were you excited? Things like that. Like, it's just all like, a lot of trial and error. But, the guys that really came in that were willing to, do a lot, again, for those same reasons, like, without a lot of expectations in return, like, yeah, those are the guys we brought on and gave a lot of chances to, so it's there's no quick no quick path to anything covering MMA. And just, even as a fighter, like, unless if you're like a celebrity, unless if you're CM Punk with like a million followers from a different world, you're not stepping into the UFC and, like, with 2 fights under your belt. It's just like, let's be real here.
Well, I think fighters, they don't even realize like how much we have in common with them. You know what I mean? Like, we have our own regional scene. We have our shit paid too. And then
Yeah.
you have to try to stand. It's like, I know you guys hate us, but it's like, do you realize how much we have in common with you? It's like it's a similar grind, and we love the same sport too.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we don't get punched in the face for it, but
That's
yeah,
so
there's
good.
there's a lot of similar things. A lot of similar things, man. It's definitely a grind, and we can empathize with that, especially I actually well, before the pandemic hit, and before I got sick right before the pandemic, I was training at Fortis, doing jiu-jitsu classes with those guys over there, and it's a grind showing up 6 o'clock in the morning, rolling around for hours, hour and a half or so, getting like damn near choked out every morning. Like, that's the life that those guys live, man. Sparring and all that shit. Like, it is a grind. And
No,
that's why like, I have so much respect for those guys. Like, yeah, we get on Twitter and we're critical of a lot of them, for things that they may or may not do. But if you step in that cage, I got a ton of respect for you.
100%. It must be pretty cool to go to Fortis too. Like, you feel like every fighter that goes to Fortis, it's like there's some kind of prospect that have a bright future. Like, there's so many killers coming out of Fortis. And the fact that, you're close to it too, like obviously with the pandemic, you can't do anything about it, but it gives you some kind of opportunity to do stuff in person like you did with Jeff Neal at some point.
Yeah. That was really cool, man. Me and Jeff kind of hit it off a little bit, just training out there. And of course we had him on the Slip and Dip podcast a couple of times, and with my man Kendrick. And it was cool being out there. But I mean, at the same time, like I was training a little bit, for my first amateur fight like years ago, right? And it just never happened for, various reasons. And then I hit it off with Coach Safe, and I told him like, hey, I want to get an amateur fight in before I get too old. And, he invited me out to start working. And then, of course, a global pandemic hits. And it's like, all right, I'm going to stop training now. Like, I'm not going to expose myself. I don't want to be the guy that brings COVID into the gym.
Right.
Like, I don't want to be that guy. So I'm going to stay away. I'm going to let the professional guys handle it in whatever best way that they think is professional enough to them. So I'm going to stay away. I don't want to be the guy that brings COVID into the gym, and some guys did get it,
Yeah.
Jeff Neal had it. Safe even had it. That's why he wasn't in his corner this past weekend. So just a whole bunch of craziness going on with this whole thing, man.
Yeah, I talked to Ramiz on the podcast yesterday, and he had it too. I mean, it was like,
Yes,
well,
yeah.
obviously he's had every health problem you can think of. Like we were just listing it off, and it's like, holy shit, man! Like at some point, you've reached a point where you've gotten every medical thing, and now you're good to go, like for at least 10 years, where you're straight.
Yeah. It's it's weird that these guys go through so much. And that's part of the thing that we don't always realize, especially fans. They don't always realize like what these guys go through just to get into the cage.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, like you said, Ramiz he'd gone through the grinder. Like Jeff had COVID, and then he had so many other issues after that, like with heart issues and everything like that. And for him to get in there and step in against Stephen Thompson, like that was a hell of a year. Like he said after the fact, like he was just happy, even though he lost. Like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he was happy to be able to compete again, like considering the year that he's had.
Well, Ramiz was telling me that Chael Sonnen did, I guess, a video, and he said, because I don't really watch Chael Sonnen, but he was telling me Chael Sonnen said that I guess he saw Jeff was complimented his suit, and Jeff was just like, yeah, cool, or something like that. And he was like, wait a minute, that Ramiz like, that doesn't sound like Jeff. Jeff's a nice guy in the world. He would have given Chael his suit if he'd asked for it. And then he was like, I think he got him mixed up with Chaos, but it's like, and then but then I was like, yeah, that does make sense, because Chaos shows up in the really nice suits, and I've never talked to him, but he doesn't seem like the friendliest guy on the planet. I don't know if you've ever gotten a chance to talk to him, but Jeff definitely doesn't seem like that kind of. I've interviewed him a few times, and yeah, for sure, he's one of the nicest guys.
So I've talked to Chaos like once, and that was after his fight in Houston, on that pay-per-view that was headlined by John Jones and Dominic Reyes.
Yeah.
And it was just like a quick, like little interaction after he did his post-fight interview. And he seemed really cool. Like he's got that look about him where it looks like he's like an unfriendly dude, but he seemed like he was cool. If you go, like he seemed approachable. Like once somebody went up to him and talked to him, like he seemed like down to earth type of guy. But yeah, he's definitely got that presence about him where it's like, oh man, that dude's too cool for school. Like I don't want to rub that dude the wrong way,
Or he was practicing his Rampage mean mug in the cage, right? He wasn't moving. He was just looking down. I was like, oh, why? Like they were asking me to do a live stream, watch along thing. And the whole time, like, man, he's working on that Rampage mean mug. Like we just look at the guy. It's like ice, there's
I love that.
No emotion.
I love that. For sure. That is intimidating as hell. And I love that. Like more fighters, like, I mean, I don't want to see fighters do like over the top gimmicky stuff.
Yeah.
I want them to be themselves. And like you said, he looks intimidating as it is. So if you get in the cage and you just put that mean mug on where you don't break the stare with that guy ever, like that's gotta bring a little bit of fear to your opponent. Something. It's gotta do something to him.
It's badass, like a good stare down where the two, it's like you see like the intensity, and when they're like high-fiving, dapping each other up the whole time, it's not that I don't like it, but it's not memorable. I'm not going to think about that. Like, when they dapped each other up the third time, weirdly enough, in the span of 1 minute, like now when it's like two guys and like no one's blinking or nothing, it's like, ooh, you get chills. It's like, wow, these two, it's intense. There's no way to explain it. It's just like, oh, these guys are for real.
Yeah. Like if I could go back and do like a infographic on how many times like the over respect, I guess you could call it, the over respect has been shown, and how many times those fights resulted in a knockout, I'm pretty sure like the percentage would be really low. Like I hate when the guys do like the whole like long hug before the third or like the fifth round. Bro, like come on now, like just do all that after. Maybe like maybe after the fight, like if y'all want to leave the cage, arms around each other, that's fine. But Like make me believe that you guys want to, end this fight. Otherwise it
Yeah.
just like when they keep doing that, like you said, like when they keep dapping each other up, like after exchanges, like throughout the entire fight, like
Yeah.
it feels like a sparring session right now. Like
Yes.
it doesn't feel like I'm watching a real fight.
Or, they were saying that Stephen Thompson was asking Jeff Neal if he was okay every time he hit him with something. I'm like, man, if I was getting my ass whooped and the guy was asking me if I'm okay, I would be so pissed. You can't do anything about it because you're trying. But it's like, man, I would be so pissed. Could you imagine you get punched in the face? Like, oh, you good? It's like, wait a minute, you're punching me on purpose. Like, why? Don't check in on me. Like, keep whooping my ass, and then we'll figure it out later.
That is the definition of what happens in a sparring session, right?
Yeah,
In the gym. It's like you catch a guy a little bit too solid one time. You're like, yo, you good?
yeah,
All right, let's go. Let's continue. And to see that happen in a high level main event fight like that, I was like, oh, come on, man. Come on.
yeah,
But listen, the NMF title holder,
yeah,
Stephen
yeah.
Thompson. I mean, listen, of course he's gonna check on his opponents,
I mean, I don't mind, like, I don't need beef every fight, but I'll be honest with you, it does spruce it up. Like, you two dudes that genuine, like Daniel Cormier and John Jones, like, they don't like each other, and it's real, and it adds that little extra spice. Like, I don't need you to be beefing every fight, but at the same time, there's an in between, hey man, you good after you just whooped his ass, and then like, two dudes that are gonna kill each other outside of the cage too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There's well, not obviously, because there are some times where it's like real beef. But
Yeah,
I mean, listen, if you guys, shake hands right before the fight, right before you touch the gloves and everything, and the buildup has been nice, like we kind of get it. We kind of get it. You guys respect each other. We don't necessarily need it to be,
yeah,
you know, you don't need to remind us every 2 minutes. But I mean, hey, whatever works for these guys. Some guys don't necessarily want to hurt the other opponent. And that's actually like one of the more interesting things when we hear fighters talk about that is when they're like, I'm a fighter, but I don't necessarily want to hurt the guy I'm in there against, which some people
yeah,
just don't get that. Some
yeah,
people don't get that, man. And yeah, it's true though. Because I mean, listen, at the end of the day, some people don't want to see other guys hurt because they understand that this is how they make their living. So they show up, they want to compete, they obviously want to win, and they want to get their hand raised so they can get their, the other half of their check.
yeah.
But they don't necessarily want to take the other guy out of commission for a long time either, because they know that's how they put their food on the table. So there is a lot of respect, and I do love that side of the sportsmanship thing. I just don't like when it's like overly displayed during the fight, if that makes sense.
Or the fakest beef that ended up backfiring that I can think of off the top of my head was Ronda Rousey and Holly Holm. Like there nothing happened. Come weigh in, she creates this whole storyline like you're pretending you're a nice person, blah 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 blah. And then she got knocked out, and it was like, what are you doing? Like I thought you guys were there was nothing. Like what is this? Like it was so bad, and it ended up backfiring. Like you knew they were making videos, those corny Facebook, like you never know who you're talking to and all that shit.
Funny thing about that in particular to me was I believe it was getting to Ronda that everybody was saying that she was going to lose that fight. Not everybody, but enough people, because obviously the betting line was still ridiculous. And, if you knew anything about fighting, you should have taken advantage of that betting line.
Yeah.
But there were enough people saying that Ronda was going to lose that fight, and it pissed her off. And so she took it out on Holly, where it was like, oh, you're fake ass preacher's daughter, whatever she was saying. Like,
Yeah, cringe.
yeah, like
So
that's why you
bad.
got a fist in your face at weigh-ins, and that's one of my favorite pictures that Esther Lynn has ever taken,
Yeah.
with Rhonda's hair flying all over as Holly's just sitting there like with a fist in her face.
Oh man, the worst part about Rhonda is she's an example of like, the mental game and sort of how to handle a loss and things like that. Cause she handled it so bad. Like I talk to fighters all the time and during interviews, like if they lose for the first time, like, did you handle it how you thought you would? Like, were you a Rhonda about it? Or were you able to sort of, and then everybody knows this, like she took, not only did she take one loss badly, she took the second one really badly too. Like, the media hates me. It's like, the media doesn't really care. Like, I don't know. It was crazy. Like how badly she dealt with it mentally.
Yeah, the fact that she was running through airports with sunglasses and pillows over her face, like a broken celebrity coming off of a bender. Yeah. Like it's weird. It was so weird. Like, give me the Dominic Cruzes of the world all day, every day, who still want to talk about where they failed and why they failed. Like, don't come to me with like this attitude that I'm unbeatable, I'm the best in the world, and then if somebody beats me, the whole world hates me. Like, nah, Like
Yeah.
nobody really stays undefeated, you know, all the time. Like it just
Yeah.
Habib is a rare case, you know, and if he sticks around too long, guess what? He's going to catch an L too. Like that's just how fighting works, you
And I
know?
mean, you respect that. Dominic Cruz is a good example. He loses to Garbrandt. And I remember that press conference, and someone was like, it's an unfortunate night, and he was like, "Why? It happens. It's part of the sport." And you respect that so much more. The guy who can sort of take that step back and talk about it, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah. If you don't respect the fact that there's two people in that cage who have you have a 50% chance of winning,
Yeah,
like those odds are not great. And yeah, you can obviously you can calculate the differences between skills and everything like that to obviously determine a favorite. But at the end of the day, there's two people in that cage. One person is going to walk away with their hand raised. So you have to somewhere in your mind, you have to prepare for the inevitability of a loss. It's going to happen at some time. Like, and if you haven't had that conversation with yourself, like you're just living in some fantasy world. And obviously, I think that's what she was doing.
for sure. I mean, I can understand the sort of you want to take sort of the Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan mentality of I can't picture myself losing. But in MMA, it's different. I can't picture myself losing in basketball. Like that's it. You already have another game 2 days later. In MMA,
Exactly.
you might spend 3-4 months where that's how people remember you is getting a shin to the dome. Like, you know what I mean? It's different. And the way you handle it just, I feel like even if you lose, you might lose some fans, but you could gain some ones too by the way you're reacting. You know what I mean? And people, they respond to people that are humans at the end of the day.
100%, man. 100%. Like that's part of the motivation for training in a lot of ways, right? Is I'm training not to get my ass kicked. So like you're like part of your motivation already has to be surrounded around the idea of not losing.
Yeah.
So like you have to have that somewhere in your mindset already. Like if I do this, I will not lose.
Yeah.
Loss is a motivating factor for you. Like I just don't. It's mind blowing to me. Like yeah, like okay, I messed up. I had the wrong game plan, or I didn't prepare as well, didn't watch enough tape, or you know what, I didn't dodge this right punch. There's so many different factors that can go wrong, especially in MMA, because there's so many different things that can go wrong for you. I mean, it's just mind blowing to me when guys or girls are just like, "Oh, I can't believe I lost."
It's like, really? Like, you can't believe it? Like, that's the sport.
Yeah, exactly. Like losses happen. Yeah, yeah. The best of the best lose a lot less than the other ones, but at the end of the day, man, it's still very likely that at some point in your career you're going to catch an L.
You mentioned training not to get your ass whooped, but what's the status of your amateur fight? Like, can we still expect it at some point, maybe 21, 22?
Shit, probably not. Probably
No?
not at this point. Yeah, especially like I mean, I wanted to do it because I'm 36 now, right? And I'm still in decent shape, but I don't know. I pretty much checked out of that idea. Pretty much checked out. Like even if the pandemic ended like tomorrow and everything was right up, good, go back to it, I would probably start training again. But I don't know. The idea of getting into a fight at this point,
Yeah.
kind of over it.
Yeah, I feel like if your opponent was some kind of big anti-mask or pro-Trump, anti-Kaepernick, like maybe that would get you the motivation to get you out in that cage. I feel like we could make it happen with the right, Colby Covington of an opponent.
See, I I would much rather just dunk on those dudes on Twitter all
Yeah.
day than actually get into a fist fight with them, because it's like you don't deserve that much energy with all of your ignorance that you're wrapping yourself in. Does not deserve that much of my actual physical attention. Even though it would be pretty satisfying to punch a couple of them.
But if you did compete in the fight, though, what would you have done, like content-wise? Like, would you have documented it? Would you have written an article explaining your experience? Like, I feel like you'd have that unique angle that other people wouldn't necessarily have because you did compete.
Yeah, that was the plan. Me and Safe had talked about, doing some sort of like documentary footage around it a little bit, having him talk about it a little bit. But yeah, it was going to be, think embedded sort of thing, like video wise, and
Yeah.
maybe a long form article or two about the whole experience. But yeah, I had ideas around that, and who knows? Maybe it'll happen. Maybe my idea will change. Maybe my mind will change here in a couple months. Again, I'm not stepping back into anybody's gym until
Yeah.
I am vaccinated for one, and I know that most of the people going there are vaccinated as well, just because I don't want to be a carrier for anyone. Like, I don't want to get anybody else sick and, to mess up what they got going on.
For sure. I feel like I want to see that so bad now. You know what I mean? Like, you get me excited. It's like, we had The Last Dance, and now we have Matthew Wells stepping into the cage and making it happen. And the fact that you have such a badass team around you, like, could you imagine Coach Safe? Like, I had Mike Rodriguez telling me I should think about doing something in studio. I was like, dude, I'm in North Carolina. I was like,
Yeah.
we're gonna have Derek Brunson, I'm gonna have Jamie Pickett, and that's it. And we're gonna be alternating. Like, you're in Texas, you have all these guys. If I were to do something like that, you'd have a coach no one ever heard of, and then me trying to hype myself up to make the documentary seem more important.
So I've had Coach Save yell at me a couple of times in training,
Yeah.
and that was good enough for me. Yeah, it's fun, man. He's a good dude. He's one of the best, really. He really is one of the best coaches. Certainly deserves all the credit. I was hoping that that Jeff and Alex could pull out the wins this past weekend, because those would have been the biggest wins of their career, some of the biggest wins for the gym. But unfortunately, things happen, and I have no doubt that they'll get back on the horse and come back better.
Is Safe as jacked in person as it? Because I saw a picture of him. I think he was with Ramiz or something like that. And he had his shirt off, and I was like, "This guy's jacked. Is he that big in real life?"
Yeah, he's a big dude. He's not like super tall or anything, but yeah, he's definitely got some muscles on him for sure.
No, because
he can intimidate the hell out of you.
Oh, hell yeah! It's like it's like I don't even have to meet him to know that it'd be intimidating. Like, just the way you hear him talk about his relationship with his fighters and stuff. Like, that's not for everybody. Some guys need the hand holding. I doubt you'd get any hand holding with Coach Safe.
Well, see, that's kind of like the thing. That's kind of like, that's one of his best qualities, I think, because he has the ability to identify which people respond to what. So some people respond to the in your face yelling at every turn, right? And some people respond to like, hey, you messed up doing this, and then that's all they need, right? So he has the ability to switch that up with every person, and I think that's the mark of a great coach. Know what your people respond to, and then do that for them. And he's really good at that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like if people are like me and they have issues with authority, and you had your coach constantly yelling at you, like, that would just cause issues more than anything else. Because then you don't want to do it. Like, keep your hands up. Don't tell me what to do. I'll keep my hands down. And then you get starched in front of everyone. But
Yeah.
but the thing is, though, the way you see that he does such a great job, I feel like it's with Uriah Hall, right? Like, the thing is, everyone was saying like he's got all the skills, and then mentally he wasn't where he needed to be. And then you see him make that switch to Fortis. And I was telling Ramiz yesterday, like, you can see the difference in mentality in the way he's fighting. Obviously, against Anderson, it was a little weird, but aside from that, like, you feel like he has made some great strides now that he's with Fortis.
No, 100%, 100%. Yeah, it's the relationships that he builds with guys. The trust, because Uriah has had issues with finding, I guess, a certain level of comfort throughout his career, I guess. But that's one of the things he talked about, and he's like, he loves it at Fortis, man. Loves it there. I mean, there is something a little bit different, because I've been in a couple of gyms, over the years, and Fortis, it's got like a unique thing about it where everybody, like, they show up to work. There's rarely any like complaining from anybody, and it's just like everybody's there knowing what they're supposed to do, whether the pro fighters, all the way from the pro fighters to the people that are paying for classes just to show up, once or twice a week. Everybody just shows up, does their job, and goes home. Like, sure, there'll be a couple of conversations, after the fact, but it's like in and out for the most part. I mean, hell, Dallas is a very big city with a lot of stuff going on, and most of the people in there, they got jobs, to go get to immediately after class. So it's like boom, boom, in and out, very businesslike, and going about your day. Show up the next day, do it again.
I'm surprised it's taking this long for Dallas to be like more of an MMA place. You know what I mean? Like, when you Albuquerque is like, it's like, that's not a big market. Like, but Dallas is like, that's, like, if you go to France and you ask people name some states, like, people are going to say Dallas. And then you try to explain to them like, well, it's Texas, but whatever. Like, it's huge. And then you only now have we started hearing about it as a place for MMA and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird. I mean, there's been, you think over the years, like Johnny Hendricks, obviously, he had his run at the top, right? And he was training out of Fort Worth. But there wasn't like you said, like the mega like gym, like that had a lot of respect worldwide from the MMA community. There'd be like the one-offs, like the smaller locations. Guy Metzger has a gym out here as well. But yeah, like no like ATT, like AKA, like none, like no Jackson Wink style gym. But Fortis is well on its way to being that now.
I mean, even now, I feel like they're not getting the respect. Like, when they name, like, who's the gym of the year, and some of them are there, like, just by name. It's just like journalist of the year. Some guys, like, it's literally just the name. Like, nobody, what did they do that year to get there? And I feel like Fortis, don't toss some shots at people, but even Fortis, it's like, Fortis deserves to be in that conversation. Whether they win or not, it's a different story. But at least they have to be mentioned because you see the kind of work that they're doing with their fighters.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Just the amount of fighters that have entered the UFC just in the past like 2 or 3 years is amazing. And then, like I mentioned a second ago, they were in a headlining fight this past weekend, and then they had an undercard as well against a former champion. So climbing the ladder for sure. They're on the verge of, you got to think about title shots and things like that. Like, when are those happening? Like, they're really close. Like, Macy Chasson is like right there too. Right. It's going to be an amazing day when they finally get that title shot and bring that belt home to Dallas, man. It's going to be sweet. I can't wait.
Man, we talk a little bit about the media stuff, but we saw this tremendous video, and I don't even have to ask. I know you've seen it, where Dana White kind of released this. It's me versus the media. They don't want me. What was your first reaction watching that video for the first time?
Oh my God. That is, so we already did a reaction video to this on the Body Lock, right? Man, I had so many emotions watching that. The first one was laughter. Like, I laughed hysterically because it was just the sheer level of ridiculousness of this video. And the second was a little bit of anger because, like, how can someone be this conceited and this self-centered to make this video about me when it took thousands of people around you to make this happen this year? But hey, I'm Dana White. I'm the guy that said no. I'm the guy that said screw regulation. I'm the guy that said, screw COVID. And I don't, literally, as quoted in the video, I don't give a fuck. Like, okay. And, we were trying to like decipher, like, what was the reason to throw this video out there, right? And I came away with the assumption that, they probably had a talk with, the execs at ESPN or Disney or whatever. And they were like, hey, congratulations for pulling off, you concluded your final event of the year. Congratulations for pulling it off. You got most of your events out there. You had fights fall through, but, you put on the fights, hit some targets, broke some records, whatever have you. And this was their iteration of saying, we did it.
Yeah.
Was to come out and attack the media and throw the media under the bus for having very legitimate questions, when at the time, after the Kevin Lee and Charles Oliveira fight, or right around that same week, you guys weren't very concerned about COVID. Like, the NBA shut down that week, and we're like, yep, we're still got to fight on Saturday. And nope, not worried about COVID all that much. And then, like, yep, UFC 249 still going on. Yep, we're not worried about COVID. That's around the height. That was when the height of all of the questions and all of the bashing, all of the, I guess if you want to call it like attacks on the UFC were coming out. It's because you weren't giving us answers to these questions. And the answers that you were giving us were like, yeah, we're still just pushing forward. Like, what about COVID protocols? What about everybody else shutting down, staying home? What about these government regulations saying that you're probably shouldn't be doing this right now? And they weren't giving us answers to that stuff then. So to make this whole video in December attacking the media for what they were saying back then around UFC 249 time is ridiculous, because ever since after that, after Fight Island started and we saw like how the bubble and everything started working out in Fight Island, those criticisms kind of started subsiding a little bit because we saw the process being played out. We saw that it was working to an extent. We saw a fighter here and there would test positive and they pull them out, be like, all right, so you're trying to keep it on the up and up, right? And to just completely dismiss everything after that point, to where the media slowly started focusing on the actual fights again, because, hey, it looks like you actually have the COVID stuff under control now. So we we stopped being critical about it because we saw the process. But no, let's in December after our final event, let's revisit May and April and just start attacking. Let's go back and attack the media. Let's bring up public enemy number one, Josh Gross, and throw his face on this video 15 times. Like, what? Most ridiculous thing ever, man.
Man, I remember watching it and I'm thinking, this is the biggest crock of shit I've seen in a long time. I was like, what is this? Like, no, everything was from like March, like you said, March and April. I was like, how? None of this is relevant. Literally, everyone said, like, it's like it probably shouldn't happen, but if the UFC can pull it off, we'll give them credit. UFC, there was a point where they were pulling it off, and I feel like now we've reached a point where it's like, how many fights? I think we got, what, 7 fights get canceled recently from COVID. Now you're not pulling it off quite as much, but when they were, everyone was giving you credit. Everyone was like, you know what, the UFC, they did it and stuff. And I hate that. It always seems like they do this big, the MMA media versus the UFC. It's like, people act like we don't like the sport. You know what I mean? Like, oh, the media wanted us shut down. No, we want the sport, but we don't want everybody to get sick. You know what I mean? It's like, you got to put the health and the people first. And the big thing I hated was the way the fighters reacted to it. You know what I mean? Like all these same fighters that are like, the media doesn't interview me enough. I don't do enough. And they're the same ones going, yeah, fuck the media. They didn't, they didn't want us to do it. It's like, are you serious? We just wanted you guys to do it safely. Like, stop trying to create this hype around, I don't know. They built this story and, we're watching it. It's like, we like the sport just as much as you do, but we also like healthy people too.
Exactly. It's just amazing to me that Dana holds these grudges, man, because if you just look at the names that were brought up specifically in this video, like he holds this ridiculous grudge with Josh Gross for years and years and years. And the reason being is because Josh Gross wrote some critical things about the UFC. So forever, he's got this grudge against him now. Like he's doing his job as a journalist, asking questions, making sure you're doing the proper things to have a sport run the way it should be run. And like all of the attacks in that video, like saying journalists, oh, they've never built anything in their lives. Like, who are they to talk? Like what? Like, what do you mean? Like everybody doesn't have to come out and be a part of a multi-billion-dollar company to say anything. That's not how this works. And especially it's just a slap in the face to journalists, because journalists are a very big reason why your sport is where it is today. Because the UFC, in large part, they have gotten better in recent years, but in large part, the UFC is not very good at promoting their fighters. Not very good. So you turn to the media. You turn to the Ariel Helwanis of the world, who has, 4 or 5 hour shows every Monday interviewing these guys who go and fight, at length, giving them a platform to talk, connecting people with the audience, right? Guys like us who interview fighters and also get their stories out there. All the people that write articles explaining what's going on behind the scenes and, again, with the fighters, connecting them to the people that they otherwise wouldn't get. All of that stuff makes people want to tune in when they actually step into the cage. Like, oh, I watched the interview with that guy. He's hilarious. I'm going to see what happens when he fights. That guy may not have tuned in otherwise if he didn't see that interview on YouTube. So to throw the media under the bus when all the media does is help bring traffic to you is wow. It's wow. I just don't understand it.
And the thing too is, they're going after the media and stuff. How many quotes do they pull out of context? Like, guys like Luke Thomas were like, here's the original article. Here's what he was really saying. And then video of Ariel Helwani. It's like, Ariel was saying this, and then, but you only clipped this. Like, it's like, wait a minute, you're accusing us of stuff, and then you're doing it. So what is this? Like, what? I don't understand. I feel like they made the wrong people the enemy. You know what I mean? Like, we still, we could have boycotted covering the sport. We weren't going to do it, but we could have. It's like,
Yeah.
we still continue to cover everything normally. So, I mean, I don't understand. Like, I don't know why the fighters and the UFC and stuff, they see the media as enemies. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, you guys are here because you couldn't cover basketball. It's like, nah, the grind behind the scenes, like we would have just went and covered basketball, if that's what we wanted to do. Like, it's not the money that's leading us to covering MMA. It's really because we like the sport.
Exactly. Like, I don't know how many times I've had people tell me that too, like over the years, like, why don't you cover like one of the bigger sports? It'll be it'll be, you know, a bigger career opportunity, right? Like, why don't you cover the NBA? You like basketball, you like baseball, you know, you got ties to baseball. Why don't you do that? Like, because I don't like those sports the same way. Like, I have no desire to be a beat writer for the MLB. I'm sorry. Like 162 odd games a year or 82 games, however many games. Like, you expect me to write about that many damn games? Like, hell no. Hell no. Especially like when half the time everybody who shows up knows that this game don't mean shit in the grand scheme of things. Like, I'm sorry, every single fight in the UFC means something.
Yeah.
It means something to everybody competing. So that's a lot more exciting to me. The stakes are so much higher every single weekend. You know, you're trying to protect your consciousness. It's not like, oh, I struck out. All right, back to the dugout. I'll do it again in a couple of innings.
Right.
No, you strike out in the UFC, you're getting knocked out and a doctor standing over you. Like, there's a world of difference there.
It's like, when I talk to fighters on this podcast, like this is the opportunity to, it's not 10, 15 minutes of, how do you like the matchup? How do you like your opponent? Whatever. Like we can sort of, chat regular. And then, it's like the fighters, I'm like, how's your relationship with the media? And so many of them, it's like, they think the media is against them or something. It's like, man, like we're just regular people. We like the sport. People, they take the time to talk to you and create content and stuff. I don't understand why fighters think we're against them. You know what I mean? Or even someone like Ariel. Do you see how much time he dedicates to doing these interviews and stuff? Now, obviously with ESPN, there's a big focus on the bigger names and stuff, but still, like, you know what I mean? It's like all the guys that cover the prospects too. You're telling me like they're your enemy, like they're the ones that are bringing your stories forward and stuff. It's just, I don't know, it's crazy to me hearing stuff like that.
It's wild, man. It's absolutely wild. I'll never understand it. And I mean, it's just part of that rhetoric that, not to get all political and stuff, but hey, Dana White is friends with Donald Trump, and that's his number one thing is, oh, everybody's against me. The media hates me. Like, no, how about you're a piece of shit and you lie all the time, and you're the worst president ever. But won't go too far into that. But just to continually attack the media at every turn is just wild to me, man. It really is. And I mean, and it's not, again, like you said, man, it's not because we don't like the sport. It's because we have questions that deserve answers. Like, what are you doing to protect your fighters in the middle of a global pandemic? How about this video didn't even hint at the severity of the impact that the pandemic was having on the world? It was all about, we're here, fuck COVID, fuck everybody questioning us. Like 319,000 people have died in the US alone and counting. It's like, it's not over yet. It's not over yet. And fighters have been affected. Your lightweight champion's dad died due to COVID.
Yeah.
Like, this is the most tone deaf thing I've ever seen in my life. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's I only watched it once. I knew like the more I was gonna watch it, the more it was gonna piss me off. So it's like, just keep working, hope that, I don't even say. I think the fighter's reaction is really what bothered me the most. It was like, we cover you guys personally, or you see all these fighters that, we interview regularly and stuff. It's like, man, so do you want to stop talking to you? Do you want, less attention as you head into these fights? Like, why? I understand like your boss is saying something, and I guess you want to score those extra points, but it's like, we're helping you out too. You know what I mean? We're not the assholes that, like we're taking the time to make content with you and stuff like that. Like we're on your side. Like the media is on the fighter's side. Like that. That's probably something that really bothered me the most, was just the fighter reactions. It's like, who is more on the fighter's side than the media? We're more on your side than the fans. You know what I mean? Even more than Dana White, I would say. So it was crazy to me seeing him react like that.
Yeah. Not only that, but also like along the same lines with the fighters, man. They had the quote in that video about Dana saying, people are saying I'm doing this for money. This isn't about money. It's about making sure I can pay my fighters and they can provide for their families or whatever have you. Like, I forget the exact quote, but that was the gist of the quote, right?
Yeah.
If that were true, this video would have been a thank you, fighters, thank you, UFC staff, and a 5-minute video focusing on everyone making that happen. Not Dana White, fuck everybody, Dana White. Yeah. Dude, this was embarrassing. This is embarrassing. And yeah, like, to some of those fighters that have been out there on social media praising this thing, like, yeah, like you said, they're just trying to get brownie points, I think. Because at the end of the day, like, yeah, they're glad they got paid, and I am glad that they got paid as well. But again, back in April and May, when we were having all these questions, they were 100% valid. And they probably actually resulted in a lot of things happening for you guys too, when it comes to the safety, to ensure that the safety protocols were being upheld, because Dana was doing everything in his mind to skirt government regulations. You know, we almost had UFC Tachi Palace, like just so many things going on. And even as recently as just a couple months ago, when they had the fights in Vegas, and we saw cracks of whatever quarantine sort of thing that they had set up.
Yeah.
So they had to revisit protocols again because media started talking about it again.
Yes.
So like it's all stupid to attack the media after this. And it's like no mention whatsoever of the government actually shutting shit down either. Yeah. No mention of Gavin Newsom, no mention of the UFC execs who called Dana and said, look, you're not putting on this fight in California. You're not doing this Tachi Palace thing. No mention of that whatsoever. But let's attack Josh Gross. Yeah. Let's throw Alex K. Lee's face on there. You know, like all these other guys. Like, let's just continue to do that. It's wild.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it sucks. I mean, like you said, if it had been a thank you, like, you know, to the employees, to the fighters and stuff, I feel like, you know, it would have just, it didn't have to be negative. It didn't have to be, look at Dana White, the badass who, you know, everybody told him not to, but he did it. You know what I mean? But I do want to switch topics a little bit, but stay on the media thing, because, you know, one of the cool things for me was seeing you start the Slip and Dip podcast, right? And I remember listening to episode 1, and you were like, I wonder where they're going to go with this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you went far. Yeah, I mean, you guys like had these champions on, had some great interviews. And I mean, what was the goal when you started Slip and Dip? Like, did you think you would reach sort of the heights that you did when you guys were in your prime?
We'd hope so. Hope so. But yeah, the plan was always to, you know, start like an interview style show, have guys on and just get the biggest guests that we could, week in and week out. And we just grinded away, man. We just grinded. And it really started because me and Kendrick, you know, we met at UFC 200. We had actually covered an event before that, but we really didn't talk all that much. But at UFC 200, you know, during our media day or whatever, he came over and we started talking, and come to find out, like, we lived 5 minutes away from each other. We're like, wait, like we're in Vegas and you live literally around the corner from me. And so we were like, let's start a show or something. We're like, cool. So that's where that really started off. Right. And so we just started doing it, and we just, you know, we had a few connections with guys already from doing interviews in the past, and we brought them on the show. Like Kevin Lee was our first guest, I think. Yeah, Kevin Lee was the first guest we had on the show, I believe. And I had already done interviews with him and had a good relationship with him at the time. And, you know, he came on, gave us fire interview, right? And it just kind of kept going from there. We kept going, and we'd have fun with it. And, you know, week in and week out, trying to get anywhere from 2 to 4 guests on. It wasn't always easy. It was a pain in the ass sometimes, to be honest with you, especially dealing with fighters who are the most forgetful people in the world at times. You know, you tell them like multiple times in the week, like, hey, we're going at like 10 p.m. or whatever, 8 p.m. Call them up that day. You know, you remind them earlier in the day, hey, 8 p.m., 10 p.m., whatever time it was. Start calling them at 8 or 10 p.m. They're like, oh, I forgot. Like, what? Yeah. How did you forget? So stuff like that happened all the time. It was a grind. It was definitely a grind.
I've listened to a good chunk of you guys' podcast. I think my favorite interview you guys did was Walt Harris. You know, this was before the unfortunate stuff with his daughter, but the one where he's giving you guys like the goods on everybody. He's talking about John Jones in the club and stuff like that. I think that is probably my favorite interview you guys have done. I mean, he was giving you guys everything. And I remember, you know, I was listening to it. I was like, wow, like, you know, this is a different side of Walt. And man, the stories he was saying, it was like, wow, you know what I mean? It's probably my favorite interview you guys have done.
Yeah, it was definitely one of mine too, because he was, that was the first time like I had really spent a lot of time talking to him, you know, personally. You know, I talked to him at like a media day, like once or twice before, but that's, you know, real quick when you're trying to get around the room and talk to everybody. So to have him just like kind of break it down and just open up and talk about all that kind of stuff like you were talking about, it was pretty dope. It was pretty dope. But I mean, he's really a good dude too. He's really a good dude. And, you know, after that interview, when I saw him in San Antonio, walked up to me, just struck up a conversation like we were boys. And, you know, it was dope, man. He's one of the best people in MMA. And I wish his recent, you know, string of losses wouldn't happen, you know, especially everything that has happened in his personal life. But I hope that's one dude I'm always rooting for sure. I want that dude to be champion before it's all over.
I think that's the thing when you do those interviews is you hope like, like the fighter, it's not like, they remember it. You know what I mean? Like sometimes we'll do it like Julian Marquez. I'll always say it like every time I text him, I have to reintroduce myself. It's like we've done 6 interviews. Like, do I really need to? My name is Lucas, but how'd you get my number? It's like, seriously, we're going to do this song and dance every time. So to hear that Walt
Mm.
Harris does that kind of interview and then he sees you in person and comes to see you, it's like, it's good. Because like you said, they are the most forgetful people. Like, how'd you get my number? It's like, man, we've literally done 3 interviews. Like, why are you asking me that? So it's good to hear that behind the scenes. Like, he remembered that kind of stuff.
Yes, because that has happened too. Like whenever we had somebody on the podcast that I hadn't seen in person, like the first time walking up to them in person, when I would see them at an event, I'd be like, "Hey, Matt from the Slipping Dip podcast, you came on the show, whatever." Sometimes they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that," and then other times they'd be like, "Yeah, I know who you are. Like, get out of here. Like, come on." So it's different personalities, different memories, I guess. But yeah, it's always a good feeling when they actually remember you, like right on site,
But I feel like
because that means you had a good enough interview to
yes.
like they cared to remember, right?
Well, I feel like you guys' style too. It was like, you weren't being interrogated. It was like, hey, we're chilling on this podcast. We're talking about whatever comes up. Like, you know what I mean? It wasn't, I feel like they had fun with it too, and it came across like the interviews. It felt like it wasn't sort of your typical. Like it seemed like it was a different kind of podcast. That it was fun for the fighters to be on.
That was definitely one of my goals personally. Like I didn't want to be the podcast that came on, week after week and was just saying, tell me about this upcoming fight. Like I wanted to go way beyond that every single time. And we tried to. Some guys didn't really give us that.
Yeah.
But some guys came on wanting to talk about just that. And that's fine. But at the same time, like I want to kind of know what makes you tick as a fighter. I don't want to necessarily only be doing the same cookie cutter stuff that you're going to get on fight week, like when they're in your pre-fight interview on fight week, that's going to get broadcast by the promotion. Like I want something different than that.
Yeah.
So that's what we tried to get. And we got that more often than not. So
I mean, that's the thing too, is that, it's sort of a game you play, right? Like, do you have to ask a question in order to get an answer? Can you make a statement? Will they reply back? You know what I mean? It's up to the fighter. Like people sometimes they sort of talk about the interviewer, but it's like, man, they have to be willing to do the back and forth. You know what I mean? Or if you ask them a question,
yes.
are they willing to go deep? Or is it like, or even like you ask them about the matchup, if they tell you, yeah, it's a good matchup, I think I'm going to win it. Like, what do you want me to do with that? But sometimes guys are willing to go a little extra step and give you the more information. So I feel like guys were willing to play that game with you guys, more often than not.
Yeah, we try to make it as conversational as possible. Like you said, like asking questions without necessarily asking questions. Like just make a statement and reply and then let them pick that up and run with it. Like that's what we were trying to do. At least I was trying to do more often than not, because that's a conversation. Like when you're just talking with your boys, like you're not always asking questions to each other. Like you're just talking. Like you're just talking, you're making statements, you're making observations, and then they reply to it. And then it just keeps going. And that's what we were trying to do. Sometimes it was really tough, man, because like we get guys on there that would give you one word answers, and it's like pulling teeth, man. Like with no anesthesia. It's like, oh, like what? Like how could I make this interview last at least 15 minutes? Because that's what we tried to get out of everybody, at least 15 minutes, right? 10 to 15 to make it seem like we got into a conversation. But when they're out there giving us one word answers, then it's just like, dude. And it ends up being us. And then it's like, okay, I realize quickly that I have to come up with long ass like paragraph form questions where it's like just to keep the timer ticking.
Yeah.
And then you get in reply like, yeah, man, 100% agree. Like,
what do you want me to do with that? Like people don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from you.
yeah. No, and there's been times where we cut off interviews, like where it was like, all right, I was really excited about this interview, but this guy's giving us nothing. So it's like, all right, man, that was 5 minutes. Great. We'll talk to you later. And then like, as soon as we hit in call on Skype, I'd look over at Kendra and be like, what the fuck was that?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's wild. It's wild dealing with some of these guys, man. But most of the time, they're really fun to work with for the most part.
what was the thing is, when I was at Full Combat at one point, I talked to Rafael Lovato, and I was like, I want to try to do the conversation thing, and it got shut down so fast. Like, I tried making a statement, and he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh,
Mm.
okay. Oh, okay." I was like, "All right. If there's no question mark, like, there, I'm not getting a reply. Then it's." And Lawrence Larkin too. Like, I was like, "Are you still happy with the decision to go to Bellator?" He was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, all right." So, not only did I not use that quote, but like a good, what do you want me to do? A yeah. Like, I could have figured it was yeah. I mean, you weren't gonna tell me no anyway. So I don't know. Some guys, and even with this podcast, like I made a list and it was like, who I think would do well in this kind of thing, like would be willing to play the game, go do the back and forth, and which guys it'd be like, we're dragging through the hour and it's like I have to fill in order for us to get to that hour. And I mean, so far it's been pretty good. Most guys, guys are willing to play the game, and they don't hit you with the yeah, and then you start sweating, and you're like, oh, okay, this is the kind of episode we're gonna have.
Hmm. And sometimes like you have to like, I just try to. There were a couple of times where I would just be direct with it, and when they would be like the one word answer, I'd be like, oh, okay, give me more, like straight up, like because like I'm not playing this game today. Like, give me a fucking answer, like.
Yeah.
But even then, they would maybe say another 2 sentences, but I try to watch I watch a lot of podcasts myself, and you see the guys like, for example, like I watch the Joe Budden podcast a lot, right? I think it's just hilarious podcast. But when he's just talking with the guys and they give him an answer to a question, like, and he doesn't necessarily understand their response or whatever, he'll be like, just flat out explain.
Yeah.
Or okay, like expand on that. Good, give me more. And I kind of try to do that like back when we were doing interviews, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But at least is an indicator that, hey, that answer sucked. Give me something else.
Yeah, give me more. Yeah, I mean, and sometimes you have the opposite. Like you have a fighter that for 10 minutes will go off, and then you're sitting there thinking like, what did I ask him? Like, what are or some guys they want to do interviews and they want to talk about something so bad. You'll be like, how do you like the matchup? It's a great matchup, really, and it benefits my foundation. And you're like, wait a minute, what? We're not talking about the foundation. And then it's 10 minutes of their foundation. You're like, wait a minute, like I'm gonna get to that. Like, give me some credit. Like, you don't have to hijack my question. It's this 10-minute statement that we're gonna get to that.
Yeah, no, that's hilarious too, because like you said, like there's the flip side of it, right? Where who you're about to interview gives long answers to everything.
Yes.
So like with some people you're struggling to fill 15 minutes. With other people, one question will give you 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So that was always the balance as well. Cause like when we had those super chatty guys on, I'd be like, all right, look, like I would try to tell Kendrick beforehand, I'm like, look, we got to keep this 30 minutes.
Yeah.
When we get to 30 minutes, shut it down. I don't care where we are. But then Kendrick would just ask another question and be like, 20 minutes later, like, bro, we try to keep the podcast at an hour and a half at least, like, so yeah, it's fun though. Cause there's so many things like that. And I mean, it's good when I would much rather prefer the chatty guys versus the non ones.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're trying to keep, the audience engaged, sometimes it's not always the best to have guys just go off on tangents.
I mean, it's like, and then, for the interview, there's like it's sort of a topic, right? Are we doing a pre-fight? Are we doing a post-fight? And then with some of the chattier guys, maybe you can get something more interesting. And then there's certain guys, they come on to do the interview and you almost want to tell them like, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, you know what I mean? Like, I appreciate your time, but if you really didn't want to, give me some shitty excuse. Like, you have training or whatever. Like, you don't have to do this. Like, there's some guys you want to tell them like, no, your manager's not forcing you to do this. Like, I hit you up directly. It's like, why are you sitting down with me if you don't want to talk like this? You know what I mean? It's weird sometimes, those situations. And especially with you doing the podcast where you have to fill sometimes the 30 minutes, 20 minutes and stuff, it can be painful.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, man, sometimes it's like when they don't give you anything and they're clearly not interested in the interview, like like we had Kamaru Usman on one time and I swear the dude, he was sleeping. I swear he was sleeping the whole time. Like, go back and listen to it. Go search it up on the internet. The Kamaru Usman, I forget what episode, Kamaru Usman on Slip and Dip. It was one of our earlier episodes and it just sounded like he was asleep. And I remember being like, man, this is amazing that we got Kamaru on here. And this was before he was champ.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is amazing that we got him on here. But Like, bro, like I'm getting tired listening to your responses right now.
Oh man. So what's the future for you interview wise? As you know, we sort of get to the end here. Like, are you completely done? Can we only expect to see you do the reaction thing? Which seems like, the reaction stuff, you should have been doing that a long time ago. Because just if you follow Matt on Twitter, you know that Matt's a reaction guy.
Yes, I'm a reactionist for sure. No, currently, I think I'm done with interviews for now. Um, Main reason being this year was a character revealing year for a lot of people. Um, so it's kind of made me shift my focus on what I want to do when it comes to interviewing people, right? Because I see the way that some of these people react to things going on in the world. Some of them being blatantly disrespectful, dismissive of everything, political issues, whatever have you. It's like, man, I'm really not interested in talking to you like the way I want to talk to people, right? I want to dive deep into them, into their stories as much as they'll give me, but I don't want to also sit down with like a Trump supporter who's out there like conspiracy theorying everything, saying that, Trump, like they stole the Trump election. Like,
Yeah.
you may be a badass fighter and I respect you for that, but I don't want to have that conversation with you. Like, I'm sorry, I don't. I want to interview people that I know I can vibe with, that, I agree with on, their outlook on the world, so to speak. And right now, like this year has soured that for me. So yeah, right now I'm just focusing on doing reactions and stuff. Maybe that'll change here in a little while. But right now, that's my thing. Like I want to stick to the reactions and not have to worry about relying on people to remember their time to do an interview. and like all those other issues that we were talking about a second ago, like, are you going to have energy? Are you going to respond to my questions? So I'd rather stick to doing the things that I know will work well for me right now, which is doing that stuff. Plus, right before the pandemic hit, man, I was really starting to dig the like the Jeff Neal thing, like doing like the in-person, like inside camp stuff. So I was really starting to shift focus, doing more video stuff like that and more in-person style, like embedded style type thing, Anatomy of the Fighter, similar, like along those lines, like seeing these guys actually working versus sitting on Skype or whatever, with their phone held up and shaky cam as they're trying to do an interview, But all this stuff, and like, I'm not trying to like say I wasn't appreciative of all those guys that did that for us, because I really was. It was amazing. But yeah, this year has shifted my focus for sure, for various reasons.
Before we wrap up, because I always let people plug their stuff, but we had somebody in the YouTube chat who was like, "Say hi to Matt for me," but we're gonna put the comment up here so he can do it himself. Harry,
What's up, man? What's up, man? Yeah, for sure, man.
man,
The latest classics right there.
people don't talk about Harry enough, but this man left MMA late, and he's been a bloody elbow for years now. Like, people don't talk about him enough, but Harry's doing the shit, man. He figured things out after latest.
Exactly, man. A lot of people have, right? A lot of people did. I'm so, like, every time I see names like attached to these websites now, like you mentioned with Harry and Bloody Elbow. I mean, Dan Tom was doing his thing, but I mean, he was doing his thing before he came into MMA latest, but now he's with Junkie. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, Jim Edwards doing fighters only articles, feature print articles, like in an actual magazine. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing. And I'm so proud of all those people, man, that were there. And there's so many more that I could mention right now, but I mean, I don't want to forget anybody as well. But I mean, you as well, like obviously doing your thing, interviewing, and just, man, like you've literally grown up in front of our eyes.
That's right. If you look, like when I joined you guys, I was working at my part-time job, and then moved to France, went to college, graduated college, came back. It's like, literally grown up.
Yeah, man.
Crazy. It's a crazy thing to say. Yeah.
It's been an amazing run for sure, and it's fun to see everybody on their journey and keeping growing. The ones that have stuck with it. I mean, if those that haven't stuck with it, I don't blame you. I really don't. But the ones that have stuck around and are still trying to do it, man, it's super dope to see.
All right, so listen, before we let you go, normally I say like you have sponsors. I doubt you have sponsors, but if you do, I mean, more credit to you. But you have social media, you have work that I'm sure you want to plug. If you have anything you want to plug, now's the time.
Well, yeah, so check out my current work that I'm doing over at the Body Lock MMA. The Body Lock, subscribe to them on YouTube. We do videos all week long. Pretty much like you said, reactionary videos to events or things that are happening in the MMA space. We get on there, talk about it anywhere from 10, 15 minutes usually. But if it's a longer topic like the Dana White video, like we did yesterday, that was about 45 minutes because we had a lot to say. But so yeah, check out the stuff over there. Others wise, personal stuff. I am an artist. I'm a freelance artist as well. So if you need commissions on anything, hit me up, mwellsart.com, and we'll talk about it. Shoot me an email. Let's see if we can get you something created.
All right, there we go. Hopefully it's everything. Thanks so much for the time, man. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on.